Been here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is wisdom. What is it that converts or transforms experience to wisdom? And what's the distinction between wisdom and knowledge? So we get to play with that today. I'm really excited to talk about it. And before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present. And so let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your electrons and molecules, and lighting you up from the inside out. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining stress, tension, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together, very, very, very softly. Rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, and allow yourselves to bring it to become present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it's wonderful to be here with you today, and we get to talk today about wisdom. And I don't know that wisdom is necessarily a function of experience or of time. I think that there can be many, many situations where we have all kinds of experiences, but we don't necessarily convert them to wisdom. Where it doesn't necessarily translate, our experience doesn't necessarily translate to wisdom. So I think that a big part of wisdom is learning the right lessons, taking the right lessons from our experience. And I think when we have difficult life experiences, what happens is sometimes we learn the wrong lessons. Like perhaps we've been brokenhearted in love, and so we say, I'm never doing that again. That's not the lesson, and that's not wisdom, right? How do we characterize the distinctions between experience, knowledge, and wisdom? And I think I actually did my nerdy thing of looking up a definition, and what distinguishes knowledge from wisdom is perspective. And I think that that's actually, maybe that's even more of what the topic is today, is perspective, to be able to stand back and gain see the bigger picture and see the different factors that might be at play in a particular circumstance, to be circumspect, to be able to weigh the different influences that are at play in a given circumstance or dynamic. And I think it's really interesting that as we get older, the older we get, the less we know, and the less we have to assert that we know everything. It's so interesting. There are lyrics from a song, I think it was a Bob Dylan song. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. Like, in other words, I think I knew so much more. And maybe with wisdom comes the willingness to question rather than to answer, rather than to know everything, to be in the question of it, to be in inquiry, and less reactive, hopefully, right? That's what wisdom brings. Maybe wisdom brings a greater experience of balance, perhaps less urgency, perhaps maybe a greater willingness to wait and see. I think this is all something that does develop over time, I think, but is not purely a function of time. It's a function of time, experience, and consciousness, presence, awareness, being willing to question. And at the same time, good morning, Dennis. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about wisdom. And I think that wisdom is earned. It doesn't necessarily come easily. It doesn't necessarily come as a given, going through circumstances. So I'm curious, Dennis, what you think makes for wisdom. Is it something that Dennis says something I lack, so I would venture to challenge that. I would venture to say that it's very likely that there are areas in which you are very, very wise. That's my guess. And I think that wisdom is also tied in with presence. That when we are present, we have a greater capacity to be responsive. And maybe that's what wisdom is. Dennis, you are a flatterer. Dennis says, tuning into your show is wise. Thank you for that. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. So I'm thinking, it seems like every conversation comes back to that presence is the key. And I think that the reason that we're able to be expressing our wisdom when we're present is that we're able to, in that presence, we're able to be aware of the bigger picture. And in being aware, we are able to be more responsive, right? So I don't know that wisdom is any kind of particular dogma. I think it probably is, more than anything, a perspective, or not a perspective, but perspective. In other words, to be able to stand back and see the interplay of circumstance, personalities, dynamics, to be able to recognize the dynamics and then respond accordingly. So as we become clearer and clearer of our triggers, we are better able to presence ourselves to wisdom, for sure. And I'm wondering in your life, if there's anybody that you consider wise, like somebody that you can go to for wise counsel. And I think of the phrase sage advice. That's kind of what the same as wise counsel, right? Sage advice. And I notice that when I'm most present when I'm in sessions with my clients, I think, for the most part, and because that's what I'm there to do, is to be present and to be able to be responsive. And it's almost like the guidance that comes through sometimes isn't, like, where did that come from? But it came from being able to be fully present. And I think that when we step outside of ourselves, when we experience the other, when we're in presence, we're not all self-concerned. And when we're not all self-concerned, we have the ability to perceive things that we wouldn't otherwise perceive. And I find it fascinating, the shift of perception, the shift of awareness, and how we can gain insights from all different angles that aren't necessarily what we would expect to be available to us, information that we wouldn't necessarily expect to really be within our grasp. Good morning, Josie. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so we're talking about wisdom, and based on our conversation yesterday, I would say that, Josie, you have to have gained tremendous wisdom through your experiences and your perspectives. And I venture to say that we all have access to our own wisdom, that there are places in our lives where we are wise. We may not always be wise, but there are places in our lives when we are wise. And when we are able to provide good counsel, or to hold our counsel, that also can be wise, right? So I'm wondering what is, I was just thinking about wisdom and realizing that it's not a static state, that there's not one pearl of wisdom for the ages that fits every situation, that wisdom can change with the times, and can be a reflection of the times. And maybe there is such a thing as timeless wisdom. Parables and fables and such maybe carry some timeless wisdom in them. And I think it's an interesting conversation, because when I think about wisdom, I also think about how the stereotype is that there's, having arrived, right? And in different phases of life, I think, at least for myself, I can look at phases of my life where I was really seeking, actively seeking. And I guess this plays into the other topics that we've covered this week, where, reaching and kind of grasping, that was kind of my seeking, because it was driven by feeling broken and wanting to fix me. because there was something wrong with me, because I was broken. And that was my experience of myself. I'm not saying that that was the truth. I don't know if anybody is ever truly broken, but that was my experience. And now I'm at a place in life where I'm able to receive rather than seek, and to feel into, to trust my own guidance, to feel into circumstances. But I'm not, I noticed that I'm not actively seeking in the same way. And Josie says, I try every day. Some days are harder than others, but I try. And you know what, Josie, that is the ultimate courage, is to just keep showing up. That is in itself a triumph, to keep showing up. And when life knocks you down, to just get up one more time than you get knocked down, right? That's the ultimate courage. And I can think of this as passages, passages from one road or journey on one road of life to another road, perhaps. Dennis says, the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Thank you for that, Dennis. That was beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. So that's a great saying. And it goes back to the I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now, or I knew everything when I was younger, and now I know nothing. Same kind of idea, right? That we get to be, maybe part of this wisdom thing is being more present to the unfolding of life, to be in the flow of it more, to be experiencing more grace with it. I'm wondering, has anybody ever told you something that was really wise that stuck with you throughout your life? Like a theme. I actually am not thinking of one of an example of that at the moment, but what's the difference between wisdom and insight? I'm wondering. Insight can be driven by wisdom. Wisdom, we're talking about, it's so interesting. I'm using all these visual words, I'm noticing. Perspective, insight, vision. And yet I think that when we connect to our own inner wisdom, that's more of a kinesthetic, more of a felt experience. When we listen to our heart, when we listen to our own guidance, that's wisdom too, right? We're trusting a certain degree of wisdom within ourselves to give us guidance. And I wonder, in these times with so many challenges on so many fronts, I think we're called upon again to connect inside, to find our counsel, to connect and be in alignment with our heart and our soul, and that there's wisdom in that. there's wisdom in finding that place of presence within ourselves. So maybe the upshot of this conversation is not to be looking outside ourselves for wisdom necessarily, but to use to connect with our internal wisdom. And this happens more and more as we heal our wounds, as we come to trust ourselves. And we were talking about identities yesterday, and it was as a result of a revelation that I had, that there was still the presence of an identity that I thought I had routed out. And I wonder what would happen if, even in the midst of our personal evolution and our healing, if we could know that we have wisdom, and that wisdom is available to guide us, and to be wise, each of us ourselves, even though, you know, what you said, Dennis, is the fool doth think he is wise, and the wise man knows himself to be a fool. To be present to our own wisdom without ego, you know, without, let's not confuse wisdom with knowing, because perhaps part of wisdom is being in the not knowing, being in the possibility, being in the openness to receive the information that is all around us all the time. And if we identified as wise, because what happens is that so many of us identify as inadequate, as damaged, as broken, as victim, as you know, I was talking about being a fighter yesterday. We identify as all these different things. What if we identified as wise and as a fool? We get to be both, perhaps, you know, but there is a part of us that is wise, and that we can tap into as a treasured resource, as we allow ourselves to be connected. And I just am really seeing the power of the identities that we take on. I'm seeing that more and more and more, and realizing how complete an experience gets shaped by these identities, you know, to be, it's kind of like stepping into another dimension, you know, that each of these identities has its own kind of dimension. It's almost like being in different rooms. The experience of the rooms are entirely different. You know, I'm in a purple room with lots of light, and I'm in a green room with just green light. I mean, it's a very different experience on all fronts. Dennis says, wisdom can be found as often as foolishness, hopefully more of the former. Yes, that would be awesome. And what is it? How do we discern? That's a really good question too, is how do we discern the wisdom from the foolishness? Because sometimes they masquerade as each other. And that's a huge challenge, is to know what is wisdom and what is foolishness. And there's a lot going around right now too, to be asking that question around what is wisdom and what is foolishness. And it's interesting how polarizing a conversation that can be, in these very, very interesting times. I had heard, and I don't know if it's true, but that was a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. Well, we do definitely live in interesting times, and we can perceive it as a curse or a blessing, and perhaps both, and perhaps neither. And we get to source our wisdom to navigate through these very, very interesting times. So I think that's it for today. I wish you recognition and acknowledgement of your own wisdom. And I'm so grateful to you for spending this time here with me today. And all of you, you just light up my days. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful. And that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to please check out the other awesome programming from Enlightened World Network, Enlightened World Living, and EWN One with the Earth. And until next time, I don't know why I'm inspired to say this, but may the force be with you. So much love.